Greetings and welcome to our webinar, Building Mobile Apps with Performance and Speed. This is a webinar targeted at mobile app developers and owners. My name is Jay Hinman and I am the VP of Marketing at Neumob, and I will serve as your moderator today, which really just means that I'll be mostly pushing buttons behind the scenes and making sure that everything works. We have got a great webinar for you today, so let's get into it. We will have two presentations and discussions today, and the discussions mean that you can actually take part in these as well by asking questions. I'll give a little bit more detail on that in a sec. The first presentation is by Ionic, and the second is by Neumob, and we're exploring key issues for mobile app developers who are looking to build high-performing and responsive mobile apps. So examples of questions that we will be answering today are: what's the current state of hybrid app development? What are some best practices that will help you design for very challenging mobile network conditions all over the world? And what tools are available to developers right now that will help your apps outperform your competition? So the idea is to keep this to about 40 minutes, leaving time for Q&A at the end. So each presentation will be about 10 to 12 minutes or so. And note that your webinar software has a little button called questions down there, kind of near the bottom. So during the webinar, just please feel free to type your questions into that box. And please let us know who your question is directed to. Is it directed to Ionic? Is it directed to Neumob? Or either, and anybody can answer the question. And also, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterward. So today's webinar is Alex Morimoto, who is the Ionic Dev Advocate, and he's going to first talk about building performant hybrid apps. That will be followed by Tom Catterall, who is the mobile evangelist here at Neumob, and he's going to talk about a crash course in networking for mobile. And now I will turn the controls over to Alex Morimoto from Ionic, and we'll get started. One second here as I do that. Here we go. And Alex, you there? All right.
Just let me know when my screen shows up there.
No worries.
Is it coming through?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, great. All right, so before I get started, I just want to thank Jay and Tom from Neumob for doing this webinar with us. It's great to be here today, and thanks to all of you for showing up to hear a little bit about building high-performance mobile apps with Ionic 2. So before I get started, my name is Alex Morimoto. I'm a dev advocate at Ionic. You can reach me anytime on Twitter, by email. I'm also on GitHub. And any questions that you have either during or after this webinar about anything that I talk about, please do feel free to reach out to me. So before I get into Ionic, let's go a little bit broader. I'm going to start by talking about what is a hybrid app for anyone who's not familiar. So to the user, a hybrid mobile app is just like any other mobile app. Download it from the App Store. You get a little icon on your home screen and runs just like any other mobile app. But to the developer, a hybrid app is a mobile app that is built with standard web technologies, JavaScript, HTML5, CSS, and then generally it's going to use Apache Cordova to wrap that code in a native web view and package it for you in a native executable like an IPA file for iOS or an APK file for Android. And there's also some other options for hybrid app development that transpile your web code down to actual native code. But generally, when we're talking about hybrid, we're talking about using standard web technologies. So hybrid's pretty awesome. Here's just a few of the reasons. First, you get to, as a web developer or a JavaScript developer, you get to use your existing web skills and repurpose them and extend your skills into the mobile space. This has one really particularly strong advantage, which is that you can develop for every mobile platform with a single code base. Your standard web technologies, your JavaScript, your HTML5, your CSS will run a single code base across iOS, Android, Windows Phone, and what have you. This has a particularly strong apologies, I lost my audio there for a second. This has a particularly strong advantage for companies who can both repurpose existing web development teams to build their mobile apps, as well as have a single team to work on a single code base across every platform rather than having to contract or bring separate developers in-house. Also, with Hybrid, you get to do hot fixes for free. That means that JavaScript can be loaded dynamically without having to go through App Store review. And it's mostly platform agnostic, with the exception of some minor styling that differs across different platforms. And then most importantly, no Java, no Objective-C to have to worry about. So, but regardless of whether we're talking about native or hybrid app development, the first thing that we really have to ensure, our first responsibility as developers, is that our apps are performant. So this extends to all, and it's really a complex topic, right? This extends to all kinds of things. You know, of course, the basic, are we writing efficient code? How are we doing compile time when it comes to our JavaScript actually compiling for our hybrid apps? What are we doing with our build tooling? And all of this affects a multitude of things: load times, are our user interactives nice and zippy, and do they perform on mobile the way that users expect? And are our UI animations performing? And this, of course, is just scratching the surface. So a lot of complexity there, but the potential rewards are enormous, right? Performing mobile apps are much more likely to have really great retention, right? Users who come in and try our app are more likely to stay. Their usage is more frequent. They're more engaged as users because they don't have a disruptive user experience. And of course, this leads to greater user happiness, which leads to referrals and reviews. So we get greater adoption. And at the end of the line, we hope that this leads to better monetization of our apps as well. And so, you know, luckily, when it comes to hybrid, we have a lot of help. We've had a lot of help along the way when it comes to building truly performant native-like mobile apps. Devices have evolved greatly over the years, both in terms of memory and processor speed. This has big implications, especially for code execution and compiling JavaScript at runtime. But on top of that, the web views that we run our hybrid apps in have evolved as well. Since Android 4.4, we have the Chromium-based web view, and since iOS 8, we have WK web view, which bring the V8 JavaScript engine and the Nitro compiler to the Nitro JavaScript compiler to hybrid apps. These have a whole multitude of advantages, in particular faster UI animations and rendering by using the GPU, faster JavaScript compiling, and faster JavaScript execution at runtime. But even with all of this, JavaScript for mobile is still really quite hard. We still have a pretty big problem here. So out of the box, when we do hybrid app development, we don't get performant touch events. There's no native UI components, no performance optimization for mobile out of the box, and really a huge thing that I want to draw your attention to is no style. Right? When we look at just plain old JavaScript to build hybrid apps, we have a completely blank slate, nothing that looks like mobile and performs like mobile right out of the box. And style and look and feel are really our first differentiators of our apps as far as the user is concerned. So this is where frameworks come into the picture. Today I'm going to talk about Ionic. And Ionic is a hybrid mobile framework that is built on AngularJS. Ionic 2, which is the newest version of Ionic, is built on Angular 2, which is fantastic because Angular 2 is built to perform for mobile right out of the box. It's written in TypeScript and completely free to use. It's open sourced under the MIT license. Ionic 2 is currently in beta, but our first release candidate will come out very, very, very soon. And the most important thing about Ionic that I really want to draw your attention to is that it is completely based and built on web and browser standards. This makes Ionic particularly good, not just for hybrid apps, but also for the mobile web and for what's coming next. What's coming next with respect to app development, like progressive web apps, which deliver app-like experiences purely via the mobile web. Google has actually been making a lot of noise about progressive web apps recently, and it's really exciting. If you're interested in trying it out, you can download the Ionic CLI via npm, and you'll also need Cordova, and then the second command there is just a way to start a basic starter project with Ionic to get you going. So as far as what does Ionic provide, the first thing that many people know about when it comes to Ionic, who are familiar, is that we provide a whole suite of UI components. This is everything from side menus to range sliders to date pickers to action sheets, layout, things for layout like badge layout and a proper grid layout. And this is just a few of the things that you get right out of the box, all optimized for touch events and all styled for you right out of the box to be platform specific. Thanks to it being built on Angular, it is all dropped in as basic HTML elements. These are just standard Angular directives. And like I said, all styled for you cross-platform by default. So all of the differences that you see across the platforms in these three images are completely for free and come from one code base. For any type of company-specific theming that you want in order to make it match your brand or match a particular look and feel that you're going for, this is all done with plain CSS and using the Sass preprocessor. Very easy to override at both the component and the global level, and for any web developer, this will be extremely familiar. But mobile apps also need to be able to access a whole variety of native APIs, things like the accelerometer, the GPS, the camera, etc. And for that, we have another open source project called Ionic Native, which wraps Cordova plugins to give JavaScript access to native APIs and adds some nice sweetener on top, such as support for promises and observables. Ionic Native is also completely framework agnostic. It is called Ionic Native, but you do not need to use it in an Ionic project. So all this is really awesome, but the most important thing is that it performs. At Ionic, we are truly performance obsessed when it comes to building the framework and ensuring that it not only looks like mobile, or not only looks like native, but performs like native. So this means that Ionic does very minimal DOM manipulation. All of the animations that you see across the various elements are GPU accelerated. Page transitions, 60 frames per second. Native scrolling, so you have zippy, very smooth scrolling in your app, and everything is optimized for standard touch events: tap, swipe, pinch, everything that you're used to seeing on mobile. And we also take advantage of ahead of time compiling that Angular 2 has made available, which basically compiles your Angular code down to plain JavaScript at build time rather than runtime. So a big reason why we do all this is because what we really love doing at Ionic is building awesome tools for developers. It's very important to us, and we're really gratified that we have a great developer community that really loves Ionic. We're the #1 TypeScript project. We have more stars actually on GitHub than even Visual Studio Code, which is the main IDE for TypeScript. We're a top 50 project overall, hundreds of contributors. Like I said, we have a great community, and over 200,000 installs just from NPM each month. That includes both Ionic 1 and Ionic 2, but Ionic 2 already accounts for a full over 25% of those downloads. And companies are really into Ionic as well. Ionic has become a very popular tool, not just for creating consumer-facing or user-facing mobile apps. It's become a really great tool for a lot of companies to build internal apps and to do prototyping. But the point is, Ionic is production ready. And we feel that a big reason for the popularity that we're so grateful for is that Ionic is really doing its part to fulfill the original promise of hybrid that started with Cordova quite a few years ago, and that is a single code base that will run everywhere. You have one team that builds one code base, and you get a truly performant native-like experience for your users across every platform. So that's it for me. If you are interested in learning more, here's some links to the framework docs, as well as Ionic Cloud, which is a platform that we have to provide services for mobile applications. Our blog is also a really great resource for tutorials and news about Ionic, and we're very active on Twitter as well. And with that, I will turn it back over to Jay.
And I am turning it back over to Tom Catterall from Neumob, who is now going to talk about a crash course in networking for mobile.
Hello, everyone. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Very well. Yep. Perfect.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right, then. So, yeah, anyway, thank you so much, Alex, first for that really interesting talk. Obviously, hybrid applications are a really important part of modern development processes. And at Neumob as well, we encounter a lot of hybrid applications. They're often found to be, the smoothest and simplest way to get up and running quickly in the native app space. So today I'm going to be talking about networking for mobile, and so Jay gave us the remit of 10 to 12 minutes, and networking is a topic that literally hundreds of people have spent hundreds of thousands of hours thinking about and working on since the dawn of the internet. So this is obviously something that can't easily be condensed into a short presentation, but what I'm going to be talking about today is a focus on how your particular approaches to networking could be challenged by some of the newer technologies that are coming out, and also how perhaps I can expose some of the implicit assumptions that people make when developing apps and that we commonly see at Neumob, in order to help you basically engage your users better, drive more revenue, and also do the right thing. So I'll get on to that part in a minute, but for now, I just want to talk about assumptions. So at Neumob, I'll get on to what we do towards the end, but we effectively provide a service where we can accelerate the networking performance of your application. And so we often work with a lot of people who are concerned about the performance of their mobile apps. Now, these are the three common assumptions and objections that we encounter quite often. First thing is that everyone thinks their app is fast enough, or a lot of people do. Obviously, the people who come to us maybe think it's, are disagreeing with that, and they're thinking, okay, maybe it's not. Sometimes people feel a bit hurt almost, that saying, yeah, oh, maybe our app isn't fast enough. The fact is that networks vary, and I don't think I need to explain too hard to, the extent of this. We've all been on dial-up. We've all been on really bad Wi-Fi connections. We've all been on trains as they've gone through tunnels. The other two common assumptions that people tend to look at is firstly that you can't do anything about this, and this basically boils down to the speed of light. At the end of the day, networking is just sending signals at the speed of light between computers, and people like to think, oh, well, we can't do anything about this. Well, you can't do anything about the speed of light, but you can do something about how much you send over it. And the final aspect of this is that people say the network's getting better every day, and that is true. Slowly. So you may have seen in the news the other day, the EU wants to roll out 5G across the entire European Union by 2025. This is a laudable goal, and 2025 seems like a tight but potentially realistic time frame. The fact is that's just the EU, and also it's still 9 years away. So when we look at mobile challenges, we obviously encounter things like congestion, which is when there are just too many packets flying around at the same time as part of mobile networking. We see packet loss is another thing where people have a poor network signal and they cannot send that data over the internet. And then there's also design anti-patterns, and those are some of the things that I'll go into a bit later, where places where maybe your app is sending a lot of data and it doesn't need to be sending it, or there are places where you can kind of optimize some aspects of it. So a lot of the times when people find performance problems, the first thing they do is is make a couple of mistakes. The first one is to assume that your users are like you, and I'll be getting onto something that we've come up with at Neumob that's an important part of the consulting work that we do with companies regarding performance and app acceleration. Assuming your users like you is dangerous. If you live in the UK, as I do, or in America, you're very lucky to have a good internet connection most of the time, and you won't necessarily be in a world where you're too far from a fast internet connection where you can stream whatever videos you like. Similarly, there's another mistake that's often seen, and this is less of an assumption and more of a, well, it is an assumption actually. It's an assumption that it's easily doable. As an app developer, as an app product owner, or as an engineer, your core competency is one of creating a great product. It's not in your remit, and it shouldn't be, to spend time having to fix low-level engineering problems. Just as Alex was describing in his presentation about the Ionic framework, it's not your job to deal with the complexities of a table view on Android and a UI table view on iOS when you can just use a framework to help you with that. Similarly, you should not have to think that you have to reinvent the entire internet just to make things work. We have HTTP, we have TCP, we don't need new protocols, you don't need to think about different kinds of compression, and you probably don't even need to be using TCP sockets as well. So these are all these technologies that we often encounter, and it can be something of an anti-pattern at times. Now, there's one graph that I really want to show you. This is from 2014, but it's still pretty accurate, to be honest, of internet penetration by country. Now, the darker the color, the more of the population have access to the internet. And there is the other important part of this is that this is not just socioeconomic in terms of people having access to a device that can connect to the internet, but this is also in terms of networking itself. Lots of times people will have a smartphone, but they may have to travel to a different area in order to use it. What you can see is that especially in Central Africa and South America, and also of course in India, there are huge swathes of the population with poor to no internet access. So just as we work on our applications and we do what we think is the right thing to do by ensuring there is accessibility for users who are visually impaired, who are hearing impaired, who may have difficulties with fine motor control over particular user interface controls, so too do I think that app performance is actually an accessibility issue. There are huge parts of the world where people have poor internet connections, and it strikes me as the morally right thing to do to ensure that they can also benefit from your services. Because at the end of the day, if we're just making stuff to appease America and the UK, we're leaving money on the table. So how do we address this? There's a couple of ways to address this, and the first thing I want to talk about is something I mentioned earlier, the personas, and specifically user network modeling. Now, you may be familiar with the concept of user experience personas, and so this is where you, when prototyping an application, you think about the ideal, someone who might be using your application, why they might be using it, and you create these archetypes that are useful in describing the usage patterns of your app and why you develop features. What we suggest is that as a part of this, you also look at the kinds of networks they would be able to connect to. So, as an example, I've created a persona called Lisa. Lisa is consuming, in this instance, a media app. She likes to catch up on content when she's on her way to work, she's on her commute, she's taking a bus, it goes through tunnels, it joins public Wi-Fi networks when it stops. It moves from Edge to 3G at strange times. Then it moves to 4G in the city centre, and when it's on 4G, it's very congested. She also has an old iPhone, and she's on T-Mobile, which has great coverage at her home and at her work, but it doesn't have very good coverage while she's on her commute. And finally, she's developed this kind of bad behaviour, which is that she opens the app before she leaves home and refreshes it while she's on Wi-Fi. So with this persona in mind, what we can do is actually come up with some concrete tasks and actions that we can use to respond to this and develop our app in a way that will support her needs, and also ensure that she is even more loyal to us, she likes our brand more, and she picks us over other apps. It's a competitive space, and we can use this as a competitive edge. So the first thing to consider is app acceleration, and that's something that we do at Neumob, and this is something that we can talk to you about, and I'll mention more at the end of the presentation. But effectively, this is where you go to someone else to do the reinvent the internet, as I mentioned earlier. And this is where we use fancy techniques in order to ensure that the connectivity is really great wherever you are. The other aspect is using background app refreshing. Now, most mobile platforms have the ability to do this. This is basically the concept of making sure that your app has the content ready before the user even needs it. This is hard to do, but it can be really, really powerful. And even better, you can notify your user that you've done it for them. So firstly, the user feels confident that they don't need to do that refreshing at home. And furthermore, they love your brand because they think, oh, that's really thoughtful and helpful, and it's a very powerful effect. And finally, you can also look at reducing network usage. So in the cases where you do need to actually connect to the internet while your app is, while someone's in a challenging network condition, you can look at two important things. Firstly is reducing the size of your images. Images are almost always the biggest drivers of slow internet connections for people, simply because they are orders of magnitude bigger than text. And secondly as well, you can look at GraphQL, really interesting technology. Don't have time to go into it in great detail, but it effectively allows you to reduce the amount of back and forth between your app and the server and get just the information you need. It's really exciting. Facebook open sourced it recently, and it powers their application, and it powers their incredibly famous responsive app launch. So when we look at the easy technical steps we can take, and this is for the engineers in the room, the first thing is using IPv6 and HTTP2. If you don't know what these are, or you don't know if you're using them, ask whoever's maintaining your backend servers if they do, and they will tell you. Secondly, using compression. There is some great built-in compression support on all devices now. gzip is awesome and does the job very well. Equally, Apple has come out recently with something called LZ2, which is even better. And finally, as well, you can also look at app acceleration. There are a number of companies that do this, and it allows you to just drop in some extra code and benefit from that network acceleration. There are a few other things that you can do. These are a bit more difficult. Summarized into two broad camps. First is minimizing the number of external resources. So that would be ensuring that as much as possible is already integrated into your app when someone installs the app. So, on balance, it's better to have a bigger initial app download from an app store than to have to then load it all in afterwards. Nothing kills conversions faster than someone launching an app they've just freshly installed and then having to wait while it installs more of itself. Secondly, as well, as I mentioned, using background app refresh APIs. This is something that eventually turns into, of course, offline support in general. So talking about offline support and the complexity of it is something that's definitely beyond the scope of it, but I feel like now is probably a good time to bring in the kind of alternative that I like to talk about, and that is, of course, Neumob. This is what I do. I'm a mobile evangelist, and so my job is to tell you about what we do here. So when you build an app, we like to say that most apps support about 80% of network conditions. They'll work on a slow connection, not very well. They'll work on a fast connection very well. They won't really work very well at all on no internet connection, unless that's been anticipated in advance. If you want to add offline support, that will cover all network conditions. But then you run into these problems with synchronization, with understanding where the network is, and so on. And so you're kind of stuck, right? With Neumob, what we do is we take that 80% support that you have, you drop in our SDK and add in a couple of lines of code. That connects you to our network of servers and the Neumob protocol, which basically is a souped up, faster version of TCP, which is how most networking is done. Then combined with our machine learning technology, we're able to accelerate a lot of that traffic. And so your edge connection ends up feeling like a 3G connection. So you get about 95% of network conditions covered. We can't obviously connect you when there's no network connection, but it's kind of a nice 80-20 payoff. And we also reduce errors quite a bit. So obviously I've covered a lot. I know it's time for me to go. The last thing I'd mention is that if you are going to look more into this, I'd recommend you read a great book by Ilya Grigorek called HighPerformance Browser Networking. It's free online, and it's very readable, and it goes into all the details about modern networking and the challenges that are faced by users. So yeah, take a look. So with that, I will also pass back to Jay.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Tom and Alex. And with that, we are very happy to take your questions. I will see what questions are being asked over here. Okay, looks like the first one is for Alex and Ionic. So how does your write once, run everywhere platform take into account the differences between iOS and Android? What does it specifically do to bridge the huge gaps between the features and functionality of the two platforms?
So the main thing that you'll get out of Ionic when it comes to bridging the two platforms is about look and feel, right? Both iOS and Android have, very particular styles. There's iOS styling, and then there's material design on Android. And like I showed on one slide during my talk, we do a lot of the heavy lifting for you as far as ensuring that your single code base will look like an iOS app and will look like an Android app. As far as functionality goes, some of that is going to be covered by Cordova plugins for you when it comes to working with the native SDKs. You'll have a single uniform JavaScript interface that will actually make the calls to the platform-specific SDKs on iOS or Android to make sure that everything is going to execute performantly in the way that you would expect cross-platform, and some of that is going to be optimizations that we ensure, as far as the UI goes. They're going to be optimizations that Ionic has put in to ensure that you get the kind of performance that across the different web views for the two platforms. So that's a little bit of a short answer, but.
Great. It looks like the next question is for Tom and Neumob. You talked about minimizing external resources. If I already have an app with lots of third-party API calls, how does Neumob speed those up?
Oh, that's a great question. And as a matter of fact, Neumob is able to accelerate all API calls in and out of the app. What we do is we capture all of the traffic, we wrap it up inside the Neumob protocol. We maintain the end-to-end encryption, by the way, so privacy and security is still assured. Pass that up to Neumob servers, where we route that as close as possible to the destination, and then turn it back into TCP at the end of it. So you see, the only work that needs to be done is on our side, and so we can accelerate those by up to 30 to 300%.
Great. It looks like the next question is also for Neumob. Can you compress audio and video if it's being streamed from app to server?
That is something that we have talked about, and we'd definitely like to discuss more with you in person. We do have some custom solutions available for that particular use case.
Great. Next question. It looks like the final question, unless anybody has any other ones, is for Ionic and Alex. Is beta 12 ready?
Yeah. So. I believe that if it hasn't already released, it's going to release like extremely, extremely soon, and RC0 will be right on its heels.
Terrific. Well, that's the questions that we had, and that is the end of building mobile apps with performance and speed. As I mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you very shortly on Neumob's website and hopefully on Ionic's website as well. And thank you again. Please follow both companies on Twitter at Ionic Framework and at Neumob, and stay tuned for more developer-centric webinars in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.